Hi, and welcome to my third video on the new Warbringer Nemesis Titan from Forgeworld. So, on my first two videos, I just did a sort of overview and unboxing and a few initial thoughts on the Titan. Now spent a bit more time working on it, so in this video, I'm just going to pick up a few points that I maybe missed in the first unboxing, and then I'm going to go on and talk about how I've been assembling the Titan, in particular the pinning of the legs, giving some tips that will be useful if you're working on one of these Titans or any Titan or large models from Forgeworld. Just point out a few of the pitfalls, some of the things I've spotted you should be aware of. So, first of all, when I did the unboxing, I noticed I had 9 toes, which was a surprise. I thought I'd just got one extra, but it turns out there is actually one toe that has got this slight curve to it, unlike the others, which are flat, which is just so you can put the Titan in a walking position more easily. Also, I didn't realise at the time there are separate toes for the front toes. They're ever so slightly bigger, so just watch out for that. Couple of issues I found with the Titan after I looked at it more closely. There were a couple of power conduit pieces missing. They're just a couple of small pipes that attach onto the void shield generators at the back. Forgeworld actually emailed me about that. That seems to be a standard issue, so it seems all the Warbringer Titans were missing 2 of those. You got 2, but you actually need 4. So Forgeworld are dealing with that, and they'll be shipping them out to everyone. You shouldn't need to do anything. So it's good they picked that up. Did also encounter one issue that was specific to this particular kit, and that was that I didn't get quite the right pieces for the leg armour. There should be 4 completely different pieces, but I actually got 2 the same. You can see there's this slightly different connection points here, so that the 2 halves of the armour go together like that. You can also see that one's slightly shorter than the other for the inner and outer side of the leg, whereas these 2 pieces have the same connector things, so they won't join properly, and also you can see they don't have the difference in the length there, so that could cause problems with the posing. That could catch on the foot of the Titan. But I've been in touch with Forgeworld, and they're sending out replacements. As anyone who's had to deal with them knows, Forgeworld do have a very good reputation for customer service, and they're normally happy to send out replacement parts quickly, so that's good. So hopefully you have all those replacement parts soon. Luckily these are going to be some of the last bits to go on the Titan, so that's not going to hold me up at all. Okay, now let's have a look at the legs. So there are a few points you need to be aware of when building and posing the legs of this Titan, or in fact any Forgeworld Titan. The first thing to remember is that there are the toe pistons to go onto the lower legs, and that applies to both the Reaver and the Warlord as well. So you need to be careful that the angles between the feet and the lower legs aren't so extreme that they stop the pistons fitting. As you can see, these fit in something like that, so that's a nice fit there. Maybe if it's a little bit tight, you might be able to do a bit of work on that piston to shorten it, but there's not much leeway there, so it's better to make sure you keep the pose not too extreme. Also, it will look slightly more realistic. I believe that this leg here, that angle there, is about the tightest you can get the foot, something like that. So always keep test fitting those pistons as you're fitting them. The other thing to bear in mind is that the pistons do fit through the armour plates on the front of the Titan like that, so you need to make sure they're not at too much of an angle that way or that way, otherwise you won't be able to get these armour plates on. So again, it's another thing to keep test fitting. Another thing you should try and do is to make sure that the waist of the Titan is as close to level as possible. The Warbringer does have a slight adjustment for the body on the piece that goes under here. Has a domed top, so you can adjust the body slightly, but for the best ability and the best look, if you can get this bit perfectly flat, that's great. I do that by building one leg first, get the position of that right, and then basically work down the other leg to make sure that they remain level and the waist is level. So again, you really need to be test fitting, dry fitting, drill some pins, check everything fits together. You can always go back and adjust drill hole slightly if you need to slightly reposition a leg. So I would say just don't rush it. This has been probably a good day's work to get these legs all pinned, but it's worthwhile to get a pose you're happy with and a strong build, and to avoid problems later on in the build. As for pinning itself, I use a 4mm brass rod like this, and then a 4mm drill that actually creates a slightly wider hole, which just gives a tiny little bit of play until the pins are glued in place, which is quite good because it just gives you that little bit of extra freedom. So I've tried to pin multiple parts together using long pins in the legs just to make it as strong as possible. So I've got pins that run from the foot here right up through this leg section and into the knee, and then another pin that runs down from the top of the upper leg through the lower upper leg and also into the knee. On this side here, I actually managed to fit the pin from the foot here all the way up through into the top leg, so that's just got a single long pin that just fits up there due to the angle of this leg, so that's going to be very strong. Then got a couple of pins holding the upper legs onto these sections that attach the upper legs to the hip, which are tucked away in there. So once those pins are glued in, I'll then assemble the top half of the upper leg. One thing, these sections here that attach to the hip, they are currently glued onto the hip, but very weakly. I will be removing them and just leaving them attached to the legs for painting. I assembled the legs of my Warlord fully and then found that it was quite cumbersome to paint them, both legs and the hips all together. It's a very large thing, so in this one I'm going to be painting each leg separately and glue them onto the hips later. That's actually a trick worth remembering, is that you can glue stuff with just a few drops of super glue to help get the position and then take it apart again afterwards. So I did that a few times when building the legs, get the position right, glue the piece in place, then drill the holes for the pins, and then take the pieces apart again. Otherwise, if you try and judge the angle that you had something in, then get the drill on it, can then easily end up slipping, and then when you attach the pieces back together, the angles aren't quite right and it kind of messes up the pose. So that's certainly worth doing. Also, in some cases, for instance the feet, I've just drilled straight through the bottom of the foot up into the leg. Much easier than trying to work out the correct angle and drilling through to just the right depth, because to be honest, this is going to be on the bottom of the model, you're never going to see that, and it'd be easy enough to stick a bit of filler in there, just tidy up that detail again if you wanted to. So that applies in a few places. Sometimes you might find it's just easier to drill through a flat piece of the model to make sure you get the pin in exactly the right place, and then you can just cover it over with a bit of filler afterwards. So just a quick look at the body of the Titan. I haven't done much on this yet, just glued these two pieces together. Now for large pieces like this, I tend to use JB Weld for the glue. It's a bit stronger than super glue, I think, and it also has a slight gap filling property, because large pieces like this aren't going to be perfect fits. So it's nice to just have that little bit of extra thickness to the glue. As you can see, there's that's like the centre section of the body. Top deck fits on like that, and lower bit of the body there. So you can see it's not a bad fit, but there are some slight gaps that will need filling once it's been assembled. Another tip worth bearing in mind is when you've got sections that the glue will go on, is to kind of scratch them up a bit. Just get a hobby knife and kind of scratch across them a couple of different directions. Hope you can just see that scratching, and that just gives a slightly better key for the glue to go on. I found with this very smooth resin that over time sometimes the glue just kind of detaches from it, so it's worth doing this on them. One final tip for these large sections is clamps. So I use these clamps, as you can see, just pull together, so they're very good for keeping things pushed together firmly while they're gluing. Also find them quite good if I need to bend pieces back into shape, if they're slightly deformed. For instance, this piece was just slightly splayed out more than it needed to be, so stuck that in some hot water for a bit, put it on the body, clamped it, and then let it cool. So if you get a set of clamps like this, it's worth doing for these larger models, and much easier than holding pieces while they dry. Just be careful not to put too much force, because you could deform or snap something, so obviously use them with a bit of caution. So now finally, just do a few size comparisons to the legs of the Warlord and Reaver Titan, just so you can get some idea of how these Titans compare size wise, at least up to the waist. Okay, so here's the leg in comparison to the leg of the Reaver Titan. You can see actually they're quite similar in size. The Reaver one looks a little bit shorter, but obviously it is slightly more of an angle. So up to the waist, it's not actually that much bigger than the Reaver. Certainly not as big as the Warlord. But it does have a larger upper body than the Reaver, which makes it look a bit bulkier and a bit taller. The Reaver body's quite low and flat, though obviously it does then have the missile launcher on top, which makes it a little bit taller. But it's definitely, as I said, a Titan that's closer in scale to the Reaver. So finally, here's a comparison against the Warlord. As you can see that the legs are quite a lot bigger on the Warlord. I must admit I did expect the Warbringer to be slightly closer to the Warlord in scale, but I suppose you would expect it to be quite a lot smaller considering the price difference. So if I put the leg there, you can see there's quite a difference in the length of the legs there, both at a similar sort of angle, and there's a good sort of 2 inches extra height on the Warlord just on the legs, ignoring the rest of the body.